Earlier this month, Delhi Chief Minister Rekha Gupta declared that Sanskrit, ancient India's premier language of power and literature, is scientific and the most computer-friendly language, according to NASA scientists. Now, this claim has been doing the rounds for over a decade, sometimes accompanied by pseudoscientific declarations of the achievements of ancient Indians, think flying saucers, cloning, nuclear weapons, and whatnot. Now, on the strength of these claims, various NGOs and politicians have called for Sanskrit learning to be a part of school curricula. But few seem aware of the actual history of science in Sanskrit. As with every scientific tradition across the world, the Sanskritic approach made extraordinary achievements, but also had severe limitations that took centuries to overcome. To understand this, let's look specifically at the science of astronomy. Mathematics and geometry in the Indian subcontinent began with the Harappans, who deployed them extensively in urban planning, construction, and hydraulic engineering. Despite various attempts, the Harappan script remains undeciphered, and so the earliest recorded Indian mathematics come from the Vedas. Historian David Pingree studied them in his Jyotish Shastra, astral and mathematical literature. Vedic priests constructed elaborate altars of mud brick in the shape of hawks, herons, chariots, and so on. In order to maintain consistent designs, they used geometrical formulae recorded in the Shulba Sutras, appendices of the Yajur Veda dating to about 500 BCE. Now, from this early period onwards, Indians developed a fascination with trigonometry, including what came to be known as the Pythagorean theorem. In the centuries after, the trajectory of Indian mathematics is somewhat unclear. About the 4th century BC, Jains were developing an expansive cosmology with vast distances and errors of time. Mathematician George Georges Joseph, in The Crest of the Peacock, Non-European Roots of Mathematics, provides some examples. I quote, "A Rajju is the distance travelled by a god in 6 months if he covers 1 lakh yojanas in each blink of his eyes. A palya is the time it will take to empty a cubic vessel of side 1 yojana filled with the wool of newborn lambs if 1 strand is removed every century." Now, this led Jains to develop advanced concepts of infinity, infinite in 1 or 2 directions, infinite in area, infinite in time, infinite in space. Europeans, according to Joseph, came around to this idea only in the late 1800s. Now, by the turn of the first millennium CE, the subcontinent's connections to global trade grew denser. That's something we've examined many times in Thinking Medieval. As Indian textiles, spices, animals, and other exotica went to the Mediterranean, mathematical and astronomical ideas flowed in the other direction. Sanskrit learning branched out from liturgy into new disciplines like politics and aesthetics. The earliest Puranas were also compiled, addressing topics of mythology, ritual, history, and cosmology. Sanskrit scientific writings took on a very heterogeneous character. Puranic authors insisted that the world was a flat disk surrounded by oceans, supported by elephants, turtles, and serpents. The planets, stars, sun, and moon were held to revolve in wheels above. But another set of authors, composing treatises called the Siddhantas, absorbed Mediterranean conceptions such as a spherical earth and elliptical orbits, but the basis for calculation and geometry was still rooted in Indian techniques. This rich exchange is visible in the work of the then 23-year-old prodigy Aryabhatta in his Aryabhatiya, completed in 499 CE. According to Joseph, the Aryabhatiya introduces the sine and versine, or 1 minus cosine functions, as well as methods for solving quadratic equations. Wielding these techniques, Aryabhatta made extremely accurate calculations of the value of pi, of longitude, and of the positions of planets over time. Over the next centuries, Sanskrit writers further developed their knowledge of trigonometry, calendrical calculations, and arithmetic. But there were 2 major challenges. As Sanskrit was seen as the language of divinity, the main current of Sanskrit knowledge tended to be conservative and resistant to new developments. And rather than developing ideas based on observations, there was a tendency to emphasize theory over observation and experimentation. In the 8th and 9th century CE, Arabs were able to break new ground in optics, hydraulics, and astronomy, both by translating Indian ideas and verifying claims with observations. But in India, as late as the 12th century CE, Siddhanta writers such as Bhaskara II were still rejecting Puranic notions that eclipses were caused by the demon Rahu. Professor Pingree, in his 1978 paper Indian Astronomy, argues that medieval Indian astronomers often miscalculated the dates of eclipses and found that despite the confident statements of some Sanskrit treatises, their tables of planetary and star positions could contain errors. There were also precious few descriptions of measuring equipment such as astrolabes. This brings up a simple question: how could both innovation and stagnation, dogma and genius coexist in the same language tradition? Firstly, we have to understand that to be learned by medieval standards meant to have an encyclopedic command of texts and to wield rhetorical, linguistic, and logical tools to defend a viewpoint taught by your guru. Mathematical truths were developed out of curiosity or for better calculations, but the idea of scientific innovation for its own sake or to profitably harness natural principles didn't exist as it does today. But the really big limiting factor on Sanskrit was that it required years of specialized study. This could only happen at elite institutions with endowments of food and capital, such as Brahmin Agraharam settlements or Buddhist Mahaviharas. Needless to say, these elite male institutions tended to be open only to elite men, even if they came from distant countries. Though many male-authored Sanskrit texts pay lip service to female and lower caste devotees, barely a handful of actual texts authored by these groups survive across Sanskrit's millennia-long history. But these groups still made their own advancements, very poorly recorded, even as the Sanskrit astronomical tradition floundered, as attested by Arab travelers in the 12th century CE. The star charts of illiterate South Indian seafarers were the most accurate in the world. For centuries, Indian mathematics had led the world. By the 1200s and 1300s, Indian writing seemed to have withdrawn from the world stage as advanced Persianate astronomical methods, often based on Indian mathematics, took over. To be clear, there were still innovations, especially in Kerala, where the Brahmin school of Madhava made substantial innovations in circular and trigonometric functions. But bigger changes only happened gradually. As Sanskritist Christopher Minkowski writes in Astronomers and Their Regions, working paper on Jyotish Shastra, members of this school by the 16th century were calling for the increased use of observations to verify their methods. Somewhat later, and apparently independently, a Brahmin at the court of Shah Jahan in Delhi began to translate astronomical treatises from Persian into Sanskrit. But this was controversial. 17th century Benares was alight with debates as to whether observation-based Muslim astronomy was acceptable at all. But change was in the air. By 1730, the astronomer king Sawai Jai Singh tacitly accepted the importance of observation, setting up large observatories such as the Jantar Mantar in Jaipur. Attempts to shake up the Sanskritic knowledge system continued under British administrators. In his chapter, The Pandit as Public Intellectual, the controversy over Virodha or inconsistency in the astronomical sciences, part of the edited volume The Pandit, Traditional Scholarship in India, Minkowski looks at Lancelot Wilson, the British political agent at the court of Bhopal. Wilkinson commissioned a Brahmin to write a Marathi text on the modern Copernican system of astronomy. Within 2 years, it attracted multiple critiques and commentaries from Brahmins, bashing it in Marathi, Hindi, English, and Sanskrit. The text's author was forced to retract his assertions. But the floodgates were opened. One of Wilkinson's proteges went on to teach both Indian and European astronomy at the Benares Sanskrit College, providing a model of, and I quote, the accommodation of science and scientific rationality, which still enabled holding on to the context of traditional Sanskrit learning. Today, though Sanskrit is no longer just a language, it's become a stand-in for something bigger, the idea of a perfect, just, advanced ancient Indian society that could be resurrected if only we all spoke Sanskrit again. In fact, NGOs such as Samskrita Bharati, at whose event CM Gupta spoke earlier this month, claim that Sanskrit was the mother tongue of all Indians, irrespective of class, caste, and religion. Anthropologist Adi Hastings conducted a detailed study of this organization in 2008, which I highly recommend you read. Since the 1900s, led by ideologues like Dayanand Saraswati, Sanskrit texts like the Vedas have come to be seen as infallible, as already containing all scientific knowledge. Praising Sanskrit orthodoxy and buzzwords seems to have replaced independent India's proud traditions of serious, independent scientific research open to scholars of all backgrounds. But the fact is that languages are products of history. They are not divine or perfect, but they all have their brilliances and their flaws. The language of science and progress is not English or Persian or Greek or Latin, nor is it Sanskrit. It is mathematics, it is reason, it is evidence, the common heritage of all humanity. So if you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. Follow us everywhere on social media. You can find me on Instagram at Anirudh and on Twitter at Kanisetti. We'll see you next week.